Hello and welcome to A Sense of Centerville in Washington Township, your place for stories about ordinary and extraordinary residents and places in the Centerville and Washington Township area. I'm Susan from Centerville-Washington History, and I look forward to hearing your story. Today my guest is Terry Obrien. Terry Obrien grew up in Centerville, Ohio. He's a local entrepreneur who owns Tri-Level Records and Video. Terry helps local Dayton artists write and produce music through collaborations with the City of Centerville and Centerville-Washington History. He has produced award-winning projects. He helps to promote local history through his Facebook page, Centerville, Ohio Nostalgia. His recent interviews with past Centerville High School graduates also took a look at school experience through many decades. He serves on the board at Centerville-Washington History. And welcome, Terry.
Oh, well, welcome to you, Susan.
Yeah, thanks for being here today.
Well, I understand I'm not your first choice, but I'm a great backup.
Yes. Well, we work with what we have.
Yeah, that's right. You really scraped the bottom this time. Okay, how can I help you today?
Well, I actually really like your Facebook page. It's got really great history, and so I want to know a little bit more about growing up in Centerville, your experience, and what was Centerville like while you were growing up.
Well, okay, that's a open-ended question. I got to figure out where to start. Do I start on the cold, windy, snowy day on February 13th, 1960, or do I go a little bit beyond that to start where I remember things?
Let's start a little bit beyond that.
All right. So I guess if you were to describe Centerville, and I asked this question of all the people who graduated in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s, right? I said, what do you remember about Centerville? And most of them remember it was a small town, right? It didn't have 4 lanes of traffic, eastbound and westbound, right? It had, or north and southbound. It had 1 lane of traffic, and it wasn't that busy. So you know, the amount of change that we've seen is quite a bit compared to what I grew up with. You know, and again, I lived on Gershwin Drive, which is just west of Magzik Building, and the thing right behind my house was a field, and the next thing behind my house that you would reach to would be a farmhouse. And after that would be a pond back there we would go ice skating on in the wintertime, and then beyond that was Southland 75 movie theater. But the rest was farm. Fields, maybe a little shop here and there, but mostly farms. So, you know, the amount of change we've seen just out my back window is quite a bit.
Yeah, so tell me about your family. Like, well, you weren't an only child, were you? You had brothers and sisters?
I have brothers and sisters. I don't want to claim any of them, but
That's okay.
We have 2 brothers and 1 sister. 1 passed away.
Okay. So how'd you entertain each other? Like, what did you do for fun?
Well, that's really not a great question. Not that you didn't ask a great question, but we were 5 years apart. So they had nothing to do with me. I had nothing to do with them. Basically, I was the annoying little thing that was buzzing around the house.
Oh, you were the younger one.
I'm the youngest one, yeah.
Okay.
But the way we entertained ourselves it's a lot different than it is today. We didn't have computers. We didn't have cable TV. We had 3 channels. It was CBS, NBC, ABC, and you might pick up Channel 19 out of Cincinnati, which was a UHF channel. But basically, TV was non-existent for keeping us entertained because you had to watch what your parents wanted you to watch. They owned the TV set. You had to sit in the room and just put up with them. You didn't have a lot of things to kind of entertain you, occupy you, so you found out you'd go outside, you'd meet your neighborhood friends, and you'd just do stuff, right? I don't even recall what stuff we would do, but we would do stuff from 11 a.m. in the summer till 10 p.m. at night, and we don't know what we did, but we entertained ourselves.
Yeah, were there parks at that point?
No. We had Normandy, which was, we called it Normandy Park, right? It's Grant Life Science Center to most people. We would go there and we'd play Army, right? We'd take our little pop guns and we'd have our helmets on from the Army surplus store, and we'd walk a mile down the road, down Normandy Lane to go to Normandy Woods to, you know, hang out there and play Army and run around the woods and find missing things. And it was just kind of a fun place to hang out. So it's very much like you'd see in the movies of kids that didn't that we're not overscheduled, right? We have plenty of time to get into trouble and plenty of time to explore and investigate and come up with things to keep us occupied.
You're a little bit older than me, but that's kind of how I grew up, too. We didn't watch TV during the day
Right.
so much. In fact, a sick day was horrible because there was nothing on TV that would be interesting or entertaining at all.
Well, they'd play reruns. Now, when I was a kid, sick days weren't too bad because they'd play reruns of I Love Lucy, Andy Griffin, and Donna Reed's show. So they'd play those from about 10 to about noon. Then the soap operas would kick in, and you had nothing to watch.
Yeah, when the soap operas.
Right.
Yeah, unless you like that kind of thing. So you always lived in Centerville? You grew up here?
I was born on Lew Elm, which is in Centerville, and then we moved to Gershwin Drive and stayed there till I was like 25. Moved to Miami Township for a while, then moved back to Black Oak, 3 years later. So basically all my life in Centerville.
Mm-hmm. So you graduated from Centerville High School or a different school?
I think I graduated. They gave me a diploma. I don't recall learning too much, but I did go there.
Oh,
yeah.
no, you didn't learn that much. Was that your fault? Or
It was my fault.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what kind of things were you involved in high school?
Well, I was a musician. So
Okay.
I was in a rock band, not the marching band.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'd be basically practicing almost 3 or 4 nights a week, trying to get ready for that one gig that you would have somewhere 2 months down the road because there wasn't a lot of places to play for high school bands. We'd do the sock hop or we'd play out in somebody's garage. So other than I was in track, did the band, and just hung out. Hanging out was the big thing. That gets back to what you did when you were a kid. You just got together, you hung out, and that's it. You didn't really do anything. It was just coming together with your friends.
Right. So you're still in a band, is that right?
I am still in a band, not the same band, but a band, yeah, called the Milos. We play around town. We play kind of acoustic versions of a lot of different songs throughout the years.
What instrument do you play?
Well, I play a lot of different things, but I can't read music. You kind of had to play by ear, which gets back to, because I work with a lot of younger musicians, right, and they don't have time to apply themselves to all the time that we had back as kids because we had nothing to do, right? So when you have nothing to do, a guitar sitting on the bed is something to do. So you'd figure out a chord, you'd figure out the next chord, and you go on. But that took hours and hours and hours. And then you pick up another instrument and you learn how to do it based upon what you learned from the guitar. But it takes hours and hours and hours. Same with learning to read music, right? It takes hours and hours. A lot of kids these days are overscheduled, and they're booked back to back from the time they get out of school to the time they go to bed. They don't have that free time to explore and play around to learn things.
Mm-hmm. I think you make really good points. I mean, yeah, I totally overscheduled my kids and overscheduled myself. And so I think as we age as well, we need to allow for time for creativity and exploration. That's a really good point.
And Centerville was a great place for that because it wasn't threatening, right? We were never, ever, in the time I grew up, scared of somebody being kidnapped, right? That wasn't even something that was on the radar. But now people are so afraid to let their kids leave the front yard because they think right around the corner some dark presence is going to kidnap the kid. So they lock them in, right? So it's a bit of we've lost that because of the little town that we grew up in has now grown, and along with that has grown some fears.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I still feel it's pretty safe. I mean, I grew up in a bigger city, and so for me, this is still pretty safe.
Yeah, okay.
Pretty comfortable.
Right.
So it feels good. So after high school, where'd you go? What'd you do?
Went to Sinclair, graduated from there, I think, and then went to UD for a while and took some classes. And I switched over to marketing, and then I got more involved with graphics, marketing, promotions, things like that. So that's kind of where my heart belongs in the promotional, graphical, video area of the world. Ran a company for a while, was a VP of another company. So I did multiple things in executive level for businesses. Then I retired at 57 to do my own thing, and that was basically to record, produce, and help small businesses with graphics and video and things like that.
So this is your second career.
This is kind of like my fun career. The first one wasn't bad. I enjoyed every bit of it, but this is where my passion is, right? I love going down there. I love working. I don't charge much for what I do because I just like the work. So this is my passion, and I'm using it as kind of an excuse to buy equipment.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
People like to do that.
That's right.
It's nice if you can pay for your equipment with what you're making.
I haven't done that yet, but I'm at least I'm putting a dent in it.
Yeah. Well, you got to do something with your time, and you might as well do things that you enjoy.
I agree.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right. So places that are significant in your life in Centerville.
So as a kid, and as a kid from most people who grew up in the 60s and 70s, there was a few places that people will always remember. One is Stop and Go, right? It was a carry-out, and now carry-out shut down. But Stop and Go is right there next to Sweeney's and the little stamp collecting place. That's where it was a little grocery carry-out where kids would go get candy, get gum, get an icy. You know what an icy is?
Yeah, it's like one of those squeezy ones? Or
No.
No.
An icy is a cup, and they would pour it out of a machine. It would be full of ice that had like a cola flavor or a cherry flavor, and you would drink that, right? It didn't last long because you basically drank all the syrup out of it and left with ice. But you go Stop and Go, you get candy, you sit around Stop and Go, and then you go home, right? So that was kind of like the hangout. And then there was Jack's Pharmacy, which was on the corner, which is now Square One Salon. He had a lot of great stuff in the store. He had little toys and models and things you could go and shop as a kid. If you had 25 or 50 cents, you could find something to buy in the store. So you go there. If that wasn't fun, next to Jack's, just a little ways down the sidewalk, was Bill's Donuts.
Because it was uptown back then.
Bill's Donuts was uptown, and it was open 24 hours a day. So the key as a kid growing up in Centerville, at least from where I was you'd sleep out, your parents would go to sleep, you and your friends would leave the tent, you'd walk to Bill's Donuts, 12 at night, 1 in the morning, you sit around, you grab a donut, Bill would kick you out because you're making noise and causing ruckus, but you'd get your donut and you'd walk back home, go back to the tent and go to sleep. So Bill's Donuts was a huge part of growing up in the area. It was open 24 hours a day. And, it wasn't the trendy thing it is now. You go in there, there's lines out the door. But it was always good.
Yeah, I just talked with Lisa from Bill's Donuts last week.
Oh, yeah, her dad, Bill.
Yeah.
He had a crew cut and he smoked a cigar. Right? He looked something right out of the movies.
That's why the picture on the back of the T-shirts has a cigar.
That's Bill. That's right.
All right.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah.
He was, again, as a kid, he was kind of scary because he was big and had a crew cut and a cigar. But they were pretty nice to put up with all these kids coming in the middle of the night and hanging out there.
I know. And your parents don't know you're doing this.
Oh, no chance.
Yeah, my kids told me they snuck out as well.
Well, good.
To Bill's Donuts.
I'm glad to see it still happens.
To Bill's Donuts, yes.
To Bill's Donuts.
Because it's the only place you can go at midnight.
Well, then there's other places in town that were kind of landmarks. There was Lawson's. And Lawson's is kind of right across from Benham's Grove. There's that little store right next to, is it Witten's? Witt's? Right. It was right next to Witt's.
Okay.
And Lawson's was a kind of a small little grocery store you go to buy orange juice and milk and bread and things like that. It wasn't like having to go to Foodorama or down to A&P because those were the big grocery stores at that time in Imperial Food Town. But Lawson's you could walk to Lawson's and you could buy a Hostess cupcake and a pint of milk, and that would be a little fun experience. But what was scary was across the street was Benham's Grove. And it doesn't look anything like it does now. It was kind of spooky, haunted looking, like you didn't want to go in there. And you'd kind of just stay off that side of the street if you had to go on that side of the street, because Burger Chef was another place you'd go to as a kid, which was a hamburger joint next to a place called Poor Richard's, which is another place you'd go as a kid.
I've heard of all these names, but they weren't there by the time I moved here.
No, I think Poor Richard's is now a Mexican place.
Oh, Chiapas.
Yeah. Poor Richard's was an ice cream place. So you go in there and for 20 cents they'd get a cone. And next to Poor Richard's was Burger Chef. And Burger Chef was great because you could go in there and buy a 25-cent hamburger and a fry and be out the door for 80 cents. And Burger Chef was a national chain, but it closed down as well. So
it sounds like there's a theme of food, that a lot of it was hanging out with your friends, going to get food.
Well, we haven't really talked about the football games and things like that. So in the 60s and 70s, football was played at the Megzik building, which is Megzik Middle School now, right? Mm-hmm. That was the stadium. And as a kid, it didn't even have a fence around it. So eventually they put a fence around the track, and that's where Centerville had its football games. So as a kid, you'd go up there on a Friday night. You get there about 6 o'clock. You had no intentions of sitting in the stands. You had no intention of watching the game or even cared about the game. Your whole intention was to walk around the track in a counterclockwise direction. And you would run into people, and then you'd walk around the track in a bigger group, and you'd talk, and then you split up and go to walk around the track with other people. You walked around the track for hours at a time, and then you'd get a hot dog, come back to walk around the track. So the stands were small. They were usually pretty crowded with adults. All we did as teenagers and younger kids would just walk around the track.
Yeah, build up some appetite.
That's right, to buy more food. Yeah.
No, that's interesting. I mean, if you think about, like, it sounds like everything you did, nobody's driving you anywhere. You're just walking around, getting to different places.
Oh, now at least for my dad, right? He'd get home from work. The last thing he wanted to do was to drive me to Great Skate or to Skate World or something like that on a Friday night. So if you got a ride, you're lucky.
Okay.
Right? Sometimes we'd end up walking long distances because we didn't want to have to ask our parents to drive us somewhere. And we really didn't want to be tied down to having your parents drop you off, right?
That's embarrassing.
That's embarrassing. Yeah. So you'd end up walking or trying to catch a ride with somebody who wasn't a parent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a lot less of that. I mean, I don't have a particularly social family, so they didn't do a lot of that kind of stuff. Did your kids do that? Were they social?
Oh, yeah. They were in cheerleading and everything you could get involved with, Girl Scouts. And so you're always taking them somewhere.
Yeah.
And my wife would always be in the stands because, once I see them cheer once, I said, okay, I've seen that. So she'd be the one taking them all the time. But they were overscheduled.
Uh-huh. Your kids too.
My kids too.
Okay.
So it's what you think you had to do because all the other kids are involved and they want to be involved.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and it's good to get out of the house, and unless your other friends are doing that, there's nobody to go and do that with.
Right.
So you got to create places for people to hang out.
Yeah, so one of the other fun stories is, I will admit it publicly right now, is I went to Centerville from 76 to 79. We were the very first class to graduate all 4 years at the new school, which is where it is currently today. Before that, high school was Megzik and South.
Talking about like Klein was the South?
Klein is the South building.
Yeah, yeah.
And Megzik was Megzik.
Right. Was it still called Megzik?
It was called Megzik, okay. And it was a high school.
Right.
So what people don't understand is in the winter, when it's freezing, you could have a class at Megzik and your next class could be at South building, and you had to walk probably 300 yards in the cold, in the snow, in the rain, and get to that class on time. And then you hear kids complain about today about getting from east to west unit all within the building, right? And it's hard for them. Well, as they don't realize that how hard it was going from Megzik to South. But once they left Megzik and moved everything to the current high school, it was abandoned. It was empty.
Megzik was abandoned for several years.
Yeah, and because I lived right behind it and all my friends and I lived right behind it, there was a door that was open. So we're inside Megzik school, empty, in the summer, at night, not roller skating, but skateboarding down the halls, having fun, jumping up and down the steps. It was a crazy place to be. It ended up being kind of like a hangout for kids that nobody knew about because it was abandoned.
And they didn't lock the doors or anything.
Well, they tried to, but one was left open.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
So do you know when it became like the middle school?
It was... No, but it's been there a long time. It's been a while. So this was, 76, 77, where it was abandoned, not being used as anything at the time. We kind of thought they were going to tear it down because it was pretty bad shape. Mm-hmm. But they revived it, and it looks great. Yeah,
it does look great. And I love the history of that building, too, that
it's
been around since 1923, 24, somewhere around there.
Yeah, so the way the website that you were mentioning earlier got started was during COVID. I had all these yearbooks from my brother and sister from 66 to 68, 69, 65, and even some 62s in there. I don't know how they got in there. Oh, I know how they got in there because the yearbook was middle school and elementary school all in one thing at the time.
Okay.
So I had all these yearbooks, and we had nothing to do, so I started taking pictures. The back of the yearbook was pictures of the city, different businesses. The high school kids would go in and act goofy, and they'd take a picture and say, go to Hardware Paints and buy paint, or go to the IGA, right? And the kid would be in a shopping cart. So all these pictures were pretty cool because it really showed what the city looked like back in those days. Whereas there's not a lot of files. I know we have some at the history building, but there's not a lot of cool files about the businesses in town. So I posted a few, and people started commenting. So another guy and myself decided, why don't we start a Facebook group? And we'll just post random pictures of old Centerville and have people talk about them. And it seems to be working because we get a lot of comments about pictures. We posted one today of where Burgundy Chic is. You know where that is?
Yeah. I saw the post today.
Did you?
Yeah.
Yeah. People, I never saw that picture before. I didn't know it was a gas station or a car dealership, right? It's crazy to think of, yeah. So you post that, and people will start chiming in about things they remember. So it's a great way for us in the history business to capture thoughts about what was going on in the town, because, if we don't do it now, some of those people will be gone. And we want to gather as much information as we can about recent history, meaning the past 60, 70, 80 years.
Yeah, I like the idea of collaborative history. I think it's the best way to compile history. And Facebook, we don't think about that as being or social media just in general. But it's a great tool for gathering information from a historical point of view.
Like that picture that currently Burgundy Chic, I didn't know it was a meat locker. Right? Somebody got in there and said, I remember going there with my parents, it was a meat locker. And then the guy who owns it posted a picture of a sign about somebody's meats, Decker's Meats or something like that. I can't remember what it said, but he had the sign from the attic on that building. So it's just kind of cool how things will just kind of
filter out. Yeah. No, it's been really interesting to research that. So one of my questions was, what do you see as your role in preserving history? And so you just began that during COVID. I thought it had gone on longer than that.
No. It started as COVID as something to keep me occupied.
Yeah.
And then it grew from there. And then we have like 2,200 members so far. And along with the Dave Poprocki site, which is the Centerville community page, Dave and I do both of them together.
Okay.
There's probably a total of 10, 11,000 people that are getting to see posts from time to time.
How do you know Dave?
Oh, good question. Dave worked for me back when I ran a software company here in Centerville, Ohio called Billback, NQ Billback at the time.
Okay, and so he's also interested in history?
Dave's interested in anything about the city. He's involved with Americana. He's a very community-minded guy, loves the city, loves to talk about the city, loves to get involved with things. So, yeah, Dave's a great guy to know. All
right. Well, maybe I'll have to call him up and see.
Get him in here. Yeah. He's part of that video segment. By the way, we're going to release part 2 of that probably within a month. I'm editing it right now. And the topics we're covering in part 2 is shopping.
Okay.
Where did people shop? Now, I was so surprised to hear that people in the 50s, because Centerville wasn't a very big town. There wasn't a lot of things you could shop in Centerville. People would go to a place called Spring Valley. Now, have you ever been to Spring Valley?
I can't say that I've stopped, no.
Okay, if you go down Franklin Street till it goes into Bellbrook and winds itself around, right? You'll go about 7 miles down the road, and you'll come to a small town called Spring Valley. And it's extremely small. I mean...
You blink, you miss it.
And it still looks like it did probably back in the 50s. Or maybe one store, maybe a gas station. But most of the town kind of looks like it was left, from time going on. So when I'm talking to these people who grew up in the 50s, I go, where'd you shop? They go, well, Centerville didn't have a lot. So we'd go down Spring Valley and go grocery store shopping. And there are car dealers down there. I go, what? Spring Valley? She goes, oh, yeah, Spring Valley was equal, if not better than Centerville at the time. I go, really? It's so funny that Centerville grew and grew and grew, and Spring Valley didn't. It kind of just withered away a little bit.
Makes you wonder why.
Well, I think I know why, because we're on that Route 48 coming out of Dayton going south to Cincinnati, right? We were right in the line of going to Cincinnati. So going to Lebanon, going to Cincinnati, we're right there. It made sense to kind of have us grow a little bit.
That does make sense.
Yeah.
Well, I've learned a lot. I think this has been really fun. Any other things that you wanted to talk about?
Well, the activity center was interesting. So as a kid, right, there wasn't all these parks. I was on one of the very first soccer leagues. It called Say Soccer back then. But there wasn't a lot of soccer fields and baseball diamonds and anything in town. There was the activity center. And the activity center had 3 baseball fields. And that's where you kind of rode your bike to as a kid to play baseball and watch other kids play baseball. But the activity center has really changed over the years. It has that water park now, and it has walking trails and tennis courts and all kinds of great stuff. The other thing that's interesting about Centerville is, we've grown tremendously from the 60s to now, but we really haven't grown from schools. I mean, we do have one additional elementary school and one additional middle school, but we haven't, because the schools that I grew up with was Tower Heights, Watts, Hithergreen's gone, Driscoll, John Hull, Weller, Normandy, and Stingley. And that was it. That's kind of what you still have today. So with all these people coming to town, where the hell are these kids going to school at?
Well, they have done a lot of additions.
Yeah.
And that's how they've kind of accommodated. The high school's been added to, and pretty much every school has had an add-on.
It has, but it's like they haven't really built a new elementary school or a middle school. Matter of fact, they shut one down. And so I was thinking about this way on the way in. So we grew, high school keeps growing, but the elementary and middle schools really haven't grown. I'm just wondering where are these kids at?
That's a good question. Maybe there's just not as many kids, or maybe they're going to different schools, private schools.
Or maybe they're going to more in classes. Could be like the class could have 30 versus maybe had 20 before or something like that.
Yeah. I don't know. Those are good questions.
That's what keeps me up at night. So,
really?
Yeah.
That must be tough.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for being here. I think I've learned a lot. Thanks for taking the time to share some of your history with our listeners. Thank you, MVCC, for helping to produce this podcast, and to my guest, Terry Obrien. If you have an interesting story about Centerville or Washington Township, please contact Centerville-Washington History. Please also come visit our museums in Uptown Centerville Tuesday through Friday, 12 o'clock to 4 p.m. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and watch for upcoming events posted on our website, CentervilleWashingtonHistory.org. Thanks and goodbye.